Brandon Stark is an interesting and strange character in A Song of Ice and Fire. He's very important, and you might not think that from your first read, but the more and more you look at the series, the more the importance of Bran begins to kind of build, specifically given the fact that he is the first real chapter in the entire series. Of course, it's a prologue, but the first non-prologue chapter is a Bran viewpoint. We know from Martin's discussions and interviews that this is the first scene he ever thought of, the Starks going through and finding the direwolf pups in the snow, giving them to each of the children, and that allowing them to kind of awaken their warging abilities, which is very important for all of the Stark kids in the books, but especially Bran. But it's also worth noting that despite this importance and him being the first character of Viewpoint chapter, he is 7 in that first initial Viewpoint chapter. He's only 9 in the main series as it currently stands, which is quite notable. All of the characters are aged up in the show, and given Bran's very young age, his chapters tend to be fairly simple in terms of the language they use and just how they're written overall. So it's an interesting balance of all of these complex ideas you get with his political kind of navigations in the early books and magical navigations in the later books, dealing with that kind of contrasted with this being, a 7-year-old boy. So today I'm going to discuss Bran Stark's recent past in A Song of Ice and Fire and his future in the book series, as I think he'll have much more to do in the near future of The Winds of Winter and the more distant future of A Dream of Spring, if they're ever published. Out of the 5 books currently published in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, Bran Stark appears in 4 of them, being absent in Feast for Crows, as is the case for Jon, Dany, and Tyrion as well. Bran has a pretty even and consistent role across these books. He has 7 chapters in the first 2, 4 in A Storm of Swords, and 3 in A Dance with Dragons, with those chapters in Dance specifically, each having a very distinct and unique feel, which we'll get into. But it is worth noting that when looking ahead, I can't imagine Bran having too many more chapters in this for other reasons that we'll get into, as I think he'll probably stick with around 4 in The Winds of Winter. And hey, after this video, I'll be done with the Stark kids for Winter's Coming, so who do you think I should cover next? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinion. And while you're down there, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps support the channel, and I really appreciate it regardless. Thank you all. Bran has startlingly few chapters in A Dance with Dragons. It's also worth noting they're very front-loaded. I think they're all in the first half of the book. This happens to a few characters. Davos is the other one of note, insofar as the 3 main viewpoints of Dance, being Dany, Jon, Tyrion, all tend to take over a massive portion of that book. And then by the end of Dance, we end up getting some characters from Feast having chapters as well, like Arya, Jaime, Cersei. So all of these characters who are unique to just being in Dance have to kind of get shuffled into the earlier part, which is a bit of a shame. As I mentioned, he has 3 chapters. The first of them continues his kind of voyaging from A Storm of Swords, but this time it's north of the Wall. He's traveling with Cold Hands, Jojen, Mira, and his direwolf Summer, and it's just kind of showing the increasing desperation north of the Wall, how little food there is. A lot of it is spent through Summer's eyes. It's actually quite interesting. We see Summer interact with the wolf One Eye, I believe is the name given by Varamir Sixskins, who is the prologue viewpoint. We actually get to see this viewpoint after his human body has died through the eyes of another wolf. It's quite interesting, and we do see Bran actually recognize that, which is pretty cool, and I've always liked it as a little touch in Bran's first chapter. Bran's second chapter is mostly involving his arrival at Bloodraven's cave, the cave of the Three-Eyed Crow, which is very similar to how Season 4 ends, except there are no fireballs being thrown, and Jojen doesn't die. Jojen stays alive. So it's mostly an introduction chapter. There is an attack by Whites. There are no White Walkers in that chapter. I think they only appear in a very few chapters in the series. I think it's 2 or 3. I think it's 2. I think it's a Sam chapter, and I think it's the prologue of the first book, but that's a tangent for another day. Regardless, the Whites attack, Bran and his friends go into the cave, and then we get Bran 3 at Dance with Dragons, which is one of my favorite chapters in the entire series. It's so dark and deeply magical, as we see Bran not only getting to know his new surroundings and what it's like being stuck north of the Wall in this kind of magical tree cave, he gets to know Bloodraven a little bit more, and he, more importantly, gets to know his abilities a little bit more. If you want a really detailed recap on this chapter, and one prominent theory about it, that being Jojen paste, the idea that Jojen Reed was killed and used in this weirwood paste that Bran eats to unlock his gifts and wed him to the trees, I'd highly suggest a video by Alt-Shift-X. The fun fact is that that's the actual first A Song of Ice and Fire video I ever saw on YouTube, so it's definitely got a special place in my heart, but I'll link that in the cards. You can go see it as well after this video. But yeah, no, this chapter has a ton of really dark imagery and a number of very interesting visions as well. The ending of Bran 3: A Dance with Dragons is one of my favorite sequences in the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire, as he's sort of falling through time after taking this weirwood paste. We see him touch the tree, touch the root of the weirwood, and begin having this sequence of visions from Winterfell's Godwood, each being further back in time. He's seeing the tree shrink as it just kind of decreases in size. It's a tree Benjamin Buttoning, if you will. But at a point, earlier in the chapter, he sees his father, and then going back, he sees a number of strange historical figures throughout. We think he sees Dunk at some point. We think he sees the bastard half-brother of Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, who is attempting to kill the dragons of Aegon the Conqueror. And it ends with a blood sacrifice and Bran being able to taste the blood. That last line is super dark, a super cool note to end on, and it is a big reason that I believe that Jojen paste is a real thing. I think that Jojen is definitely dead, and Bran definitely ate him, unfortunately. Looking ahead now into the Winds of Winter, it's worth noting that Bran did have at least one more chapter initially planned for A Dance with Dragons that was cut and moved to the Winds of Winter. We know of a number of chapters like this. The Forsaken is like this. Elaine's first sample chapters like this. Both of Ariane's sample chapters like this. Hell, most of these sample chapters are like this. But we have not seen Bran's fourth chapter as a sample chapter, because I imagine it would be very magical and very spoilery for the future of the series. I imagine it's going to be a great chapter, and B, very important. And we have already had our kind of very dark, magical sample chapter quota with The Forsaken itself. There's also something that we have to talk about from the show, unfortunately. We know of very little that is confirmed to be from George R.R. Martin, that the showrunners incorporated into the Game of Thrones show. But we do know of three specific things, two of which are directly relating to Bran Stark, which is notable and weird. The one that isn't is the burning of Shireen, which we'll get to if and when I do a Stannis video in this series. Get hype. But the other two are Hodor, hold the door, that being that Hodor was going to sacrifice himself to the others, or to the Whites, in order to protect Bran by holding a door, and Bran messing with his mind is what causes the kind of nature of Hodor in the present. In addition to that, the other note that we know to be from George Martin is King Bran at the end of the story series. I tried to combine those words and it didn't work well. But overall, those two notes seem, at least in George's mind, or at least in the showrunner's mind, pretty important to how the series wraps up. Obviously, who's going to be the ruler at the end of the series is quite important, and I do think that there is a good deal of evidence for Bran being on the throne at the end of the series. Most notably, I like the idea that he is the first chapter in the series, and he's going to be the last chapter in the series, with him ruling over the realm. But I do think that it will hopefully be done a lot better in the books, insofar as Bran, being a student of Bloodraven, someone who we suspect has been manipulating events in kind of an underhanded and evil way for going on a century at this point. Bran might be following in his footsteps, and it might be a bit of a darker turn. This could be the scouring of the Shire that Martin likes to talk about. I did mention earlier that I think we'll probably get around 4, I'd say maybe 5 chapters of Bran in the Winds of Winter. I'd guess 4, because we do know that there is that one remaining Bran chapter from Dance that we haven't gotten yet. I think that we'll get one more in the cave. I think that Bran 1 is going to be more visions of the cave, more training, more learning, yada yada. Bran 2 is going to be hold the door, fleeing the cave. Bran 3 will probably be coming south again, and then there will maybe be one Bran chapter south of the Wall. I think that being in Bran's head at this point is something that Martin is going to want to do more and more sparingly. He's talked in the past about not wanting to have like Littlefinger and Varys as viewpoint characters because they would just spoil too much, and I think that Bran is approaching that camp as well now, given the level of magical insight and knowledge he might possess if he's just able to kind of view the past on pay-per-view at any point he wants, which could be quite interesting to have a character that is kind of in the background or losing significance in terms of how many chapters they'll have, just becoming more and more omniscient. But I do think it'll be interesting to read as well. And Martin has talked in the past about how difficult it is to write both magic and Bran being so young simultaneously. So we'll see how he handles that. I'm sure it'll hopefully go pretty well. While Bran likely won't have many chapters, I think his influence is going to be felt across the story more than ever before. We already saw this at the end of Theon's story in Dance, where he hears the Weirwood talking to him and knowing his name. But I think we even see Bran again in a Winds of Winter sample chapter, and I haven't seen a ton of people discuss this. Most notably, in Theon's sample chapter, two ravens are brought into his, I'd say, meeting with Stannis Baratheon, but he's kind of a prisoner and unable to leave the room. But these ravens just immediately seem to be interested in Theon and what's going on, and they push the conversation in certain directions, notably towards Theon seemingly being executed before a weirwood tree. To quote from that chapter at the very end, "And suddenly there came a wild thumping as the maester's ravens hopped and flapped inside their cages, their black feathers flying as they beat against the bars with loud and raucous caws. 'The tree!' one squawked, 'the tree! The tree!' while the second screamed only, 'Theon! Theon! Theon!' Theon Greyjoy smiled. 'They know my name,' he thought. This very much echoes the tree kind of speaking to Theon that is very clearly Bran, as he does see Bran's face in it. And it does seem that these two ravens are Bloodraven and Bran, or maybe Bran's just controlling two ravens. It's quite interesting to see, and I'm very excited to see other areas in which we'll see Bran in this story so far. I imagine he'll also have a lot to do with Jon's story, if not even his resurrection. I also want to discuss a notable location that I think Bran will make his way to by the end of the series. I do not think this will happen in the Winds of Winter, but I think it'll happen in A Dream of Spring while he's on his way south. I think that Bran is 100% heading towards the Isle of Faces at some point in the future. It's such an important location, and he already has ties to the Reeds, Mira, and Jojen, whose father has very important ties to the Isle of Faces, and it being such a hub of weirwood activity would allow Bran maybe even greater power and the ability to see certain past events that I'm sure Martin would want to be able to give us a glimpse of. Most notably, the battle above the God's Eye, the battle under the God's Eye, Aegon the Conqueror burning Harrenhal, Daemon Targaryen going there at some point in the story that I won't spoil. And yeah, I think it'd be really cool to have Bran there and potentially interact with Green Men, as we've already seen him interact with Children of the Forest, and there is, I guess, somewhat of a difference between the two. I've never quite understood that super well. That is something I should probably research more and do a video on at some point. That'd be fun, since we've seen one on screen now with the antlers and everything. It's not Robert Baratheon. I've also said this before, I'll say it again. I think if one character is guaranteed to survive the entirety of the series, it's Bran Stark. He's the first viewpoint we ever have. He's very young. He's very important to the story, and Martin seems to like him as a character a lot. I think that there's no way that Bran dies by the end of the series, and he's one of very few characters I'm comfortable saying that for. We'll see if and how King Bran happens, insofar as I think Martin very much saw the response to that. I don't know if he would go so far as to change it, as it does seem to be something that was essential to his story from the very beginning, but I do think it might change the way he handles it and frames it, so that will be interesting to see. But given the fact that that is certainly A Dream of Spring problem, if that book is ever published, it is not something that we really have enough to speculate on right now, so I don't know. I'll leave it at that. That's my main thought there. Overall, I'm very excited to see where Bran goes in the Winds of Winter. I at least partially blame him for this book taking this long, because Martin has said many times that it is difficult writing such magic, but then again, I'd also blame Tyrion for being so hard to write because of how clever he is, as Martin has complained about the same amount for both of those things, and he's said many times that he loves writing Tyrion, so maybe he loves writing Bran too. We'll see, and I am very excited to hopefully see more of him, and to do more of this series in the near future. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help me grow the channel, and any support is just really great, and I really, really enjoy it when people like the things I do. I don't know why, it's just how I am. Like I mentioned last video, I am starting my second year of law school as of probably after this video airs. So videos are probably going to slow down a little bit. I'm going to try to still stick to about a video a week, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. We'll see how I do, how this workload turns out. And yeah, thank you again for coming out. I know it's a lot of effort to click on these videos, and I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, I'd also appreciate like, comment, subscribe, that stuff. Thank you. I already said that. Goodbye.